Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sales RX podcast. My name is Chet Lovegren, aka the Sales Doctor, and I'm here, as always, in the Inglewood studios with my co-host, Billy Stein. Today, we're going to be talking about creating a successful onboarding plan for new sales reps. Kind of similar to the deal handoff series that we did. We're going to do these actually in two parts. We're going to talk about onboarding today. Then we're going to talk about continuous enablement and training in next week's episode. So we're going to kind of take the entire topic of upskilling your reps and making sure that they're staying on the front lines of execution in the most efficient manner and split it between two episodes. One with getting them started in their first 30 days. The next one with, well, what does it look like after that? So, the average sales rep takes 3 months to ramp up and nearly 10 months before they're consistently performing at your budgeted quota, right? We budget everybody hitting 80%. That's why we plan for headcount the way we do. So even though we want people to hit 100%, it usually takes them at least 10 months before they're consistently hitting over 80%. So this is a big problem for organizations, especially when you consider that bad sales hires cost a company nearly 70% of that seller's annual revenue goals. And that's actually research that's been conducted by Lucas Price, founder and CEO over at Yardstick, a company that specializes in creating onboarding programs and supplementing that with software for people. So shout out to Lucas and his company. They do great work, but that was actually a statistic that they found that they talk about quite frequently. So obviously the topic is pretty important. Your first 30 days are incredibly important because you're setting the tone and the foundation for everything that you're doing moving forward. So excited to dig in this today. But first, Billy, what's going on, man? What's new in your world?
Chet, good morning. Before we get into everything for today, there's a heavy heart this morning at the time that we film, and talking about enablement. I want to start out by giving a quick shout out to a friend of mine, a great leader, somebody who's been very impactful in the enablement space. Chris Cornbrust is a guy who's going through a very difficult time, and unfortunately, the obligation to film and meet our needs as a podcast, which is two guys who talk about work, from a studio in Inglewood. That means I'm not able to be part of the celebration of life for Chris's father, Doug, who passed away. So I just wanted to let the viewers know and let everybody know that even though I didn't know Doug Cornbrust personally, he seemed like he's a wonderful guy, and his son, Chris, has been a good friend of mine for several years and brought me into my role, which keeps me in the sales enablement world. And it means the world to me, and I hate that I can't be there. As part of it today, when we get done filming and when we do publish this, we're going to leave a website. There are some great causes that Doug was involved in personally that I do recommend for the members of the Sales RX community, that if you have a couple of dollars that you can spend on good causes, that you please do make a donation. But Chris, we're thinking about you, buddy. We're sending our thoughts and prayers out to you up in Reno, and look forward to connecting again once you're back.
Yeah. And as Billy said, we'll put a link in the show description as well, where you can get access to that list of charities. So we're pulling for you, Chris. Thoughts and prayers with you, as Billy said. And yeah, great sentiment, man. I'm glad that Chris means that much to you. I think we talk a lot about leadership.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty amazing that, hey, my passion project, I'm gonna give some love to this guy who's going through a tough time. Like, that's how much he means to you. He
does, and he's so cool. I'm lucky. I don't want to get too wax lyrical for the viewers this week, but we're talking about enablement. That's the community we're in. Chris has had a very big impact in his 5 years at Seismic. We've always tried to draw the line on, yes, we talk about the things that affect us at work, but we don't get too deep into them. Mm-hmm. And today's definitely been a heavy heart morning. So yeah, I think it's very appropriate that this is what we talk about on a day like today.
Well, I feel bad that I didn't wear a Hawaiian shirt to try to cheer you up and give you a little jovial pursuit there.
I think, dude, I love the jacket. Like, I'm going to try to be time conscious because I think you look like you got an audition for like a 90s boy band pop music review.
Yeah. or a Safdie Brothers film set in New York where I'm playing some sort of sketchy drug dealer or something, right? Hipster drug dealer behind van. That would be my character.
You'd look great for it.
Awesome. Before we get started, let's take a quick moment to give a shout out to the sponsors of today's episode, Kixie.
If you've been in sales for a while, you've probably noticed that it's harder than ever to get prospects to answer the phone. It's easier than ever to screen calls, and more numbers are showing up as spam likely on people's cell phones.
And apart from the time spent stuck on the phone waiting for prospects to answer, salespeople have to spend a ton of time entering call notes in the CRM, leave voicemails, and create follow-up tasks in the hopes of having future sales conversations. That's why we use Kixie.
It's the modern voice and texting platform that turns your CRM into a true sales engagement platform, all while increasing your answer rates through cutting-edge technology.
With their holistic approach and seamless integrations, you can enable your reps to spend less time on busy work and more time on having conversations with prospects using Kixie's AI-powered features like multi-line power dialing with voicemail detection, advanced local presence, phone number reputation management, and conversation intelligence.
Not only that, Kixie's team of sales engineers will help you build out advanced workflows and automations at no extra cost.
So head over to Kixie.click/salesdoc. That's KIXIE.click/salesdoc, or click the link in the description. Get a fully loaded 10-day extended free trial for your entire team. You don't even need to put down a credit card, and the trial comes with hours of call credits included.
All right, so let's jump into our first segment. This is Cap or No Cap. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know this is the section where Billy and I will pull up a piece of thought leadership content. Could be a video that we see on TikTok or YouTube Shorts. Maybe it's an audiogram or something that we find on LinkedIn. When it comes to posting on LinkedIn and sales communities, we typically blur out the information for anonymity because you kind of have to be connected either to those private groups or connected to that person to see what they're publishing. Usually not everything's global. So today we have a TikTok video, though, so it's all fair game. Essentially, Billy and I are going to watch it and give it a rating, a cap or no cap. Cap being, hey, this is total BS, don't really agree with it, or no cap, which means, yeah, we vibe with it. We can validate this information. We feel the same way. And then we'll double down our answers by kind of giving our counterpoint or our approach if we agree with it. So, all right, let's jump in. What do we got?
All right, we got a TikTok video this morning.
The best way to onboard a new sales rep the fastest. There's really two things that are going to be most effective at onboarding a new sales rep really effectively. One is just your training team has to be salespeople, or they have to be extracted from the sales org, and they have to be really, really, really good. I was training and onboarding a lot of new hires and growing our sales team from 5 people to over 150. I conducted a lot of the sales trainings myself because I wanted to be that hands-on leader who actually spoke from the trenches. Second, you want to pair them with a top performer who's responsible for answering all their questions. And then third, when their buddy is not available, you should expose them to an AI bot sales coach. It's really easy at this point with technology to ingest all your best questions and answers, all your scripts, all your talk tracks, your training manual, your playbook, all your customer information, all your product information. It's actually really easy to put all this behind a chat bot that they can just query using natural language. And then they can have the questions that they want 24/7. And eventually they'll only ask the top performer the most sophisticated, nuanced, emotional questions. If you want help setting up a chatbot like that, go ahead and reach out below in the comments. Or if you're watching a short, go to my actual main YouTube channel and click a link in one of the descriptions of any of the videos, because I can help you set a chatbot up like that in your sales team. Lickety split, no problem.
So, Billy, what do you feel? Cap or no cap?
No cap. I agree with everything he said. I think when we talk about sales trainers, there seems to be a whole host of areas that people will pull actual enablers from, which oftentimes can be product marketing, it could be success, it could be former sellers. Everybody has their own strength, and there's, a lot of different things that an enabler, a trainer needs to be good at. But if you don't get somebody that came from selling, it's really, really hard to actually reconcile all that information into something that is very sales specific, because context matters more than content in sales training. And if you haven't been there before, especially double points to you if you sold at the company that you're training at, then it's incredibly difficult to actually marry those things together in a relevant way where sellers of all hosts of experience will actually work with. Mm-hmm. So I think I totally agree on that level. hard to get top performers to go from selling to sales training, because usually the money is not as good in sales training as like a high performer. But if you can get somebody that either was kind of in the mid pack and doesn't see sales as the forever thing they're doing, but really likes the training aspect, and it gives them something they can own, big win on the hiring front. Buddy systems are great if you can get the top performer to commit to mentorship. That's not always something that a top performer wants to do. But if you have that culture at your company where somebody who sells more than most does and is constantly hitting and is even going to club, and they want to mentor the next crop of new talent, huge cultural win.
Yeah.
And AI chatbots, the interesting thing about it is a great idea that he brings up for being able to query a lot of information. Even selling into enablement, I don't hear people talk about it that much from an onboarding standpoint. It's usually from a recurring coaching standpoint. So I like what he says. I like his point of view. I'm going to say no cap.
Yeah, I'm going to say no cap too, but there are some things that I think need to change. I don't think you're ever going to get a top performer to commit their time. Just in my experience, top performers.
It's tough. You're right.
Yeah. It's like, hey, yeah, let me share with you my secrets to beating the crap out of everybody every month on the leaderboard. I think one thing I think the buddy thing needs to be someone who, I think, agree with you, kind of middle of the pack, but is self-sufficient.
Knows how to do it well.
Has the traits that you want them to have. How to navigate out things on their own, find their own answers, kind of the shortcuts to the things that can allow shortcuts. You know what I'm saying? Like stuff like that. Someone who you've noticed does something in unique ways that in a one-on-one, they show you how they were doing something that you had a question about. And you're like, oh, I like that. I think that's very important. I like the AI chatbot thing. I think that's going to take a lot more time for someone to work that out.
That takes an investment for sure.
Yeah, definitely something that can help. It's actually funny. Lucas Price, we were just talking about, founder, CEO of Yardstick. He had made an introduction to a guy for sales training for me. And I handled the deal fairly wrong myself. I even told Lucas, I actually didn't realize what this guy was doing. I thought he was trying to undercut me. He was pleading for me to help him. He just couldn't afford it because it was this whole situation with the pay structure that he wanted to do on fractional work. And I was pretty stringent with him, kind of I never say no unless I have to, but a firm foot in the ground. And then when Lucas followed up with him later, he was like, well, we're just going to use ChatGPT as our sales coach anyway. And I was like, oh, that'll be really interesting. Let's see how that pans out. It could definitely supplement things, but it's not going to be like your frontline sales coach, right? Your inside sales voice.
They're going to have to be careful with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I actually went to a networking group last week that was talking about AI. It was sponsored by Unifor. Unifor, they're an AI company. And, some of it was actually a lot of enablement folks that came out to it. And, they come from these really reputable LA-based companies. A lot of people in regulated markets are scared to put too much proprietary information to ChatGPT because as soon as you put it into their training model, it's no longer your data. It's now everybody's.
Yeah. I love how you said there were a lot of enablement people there at big name LA-based companies. I think Billy's just trying to give me FOMO because I wasn't able to make it.
I did invite you to it. You didn't show up. That's on you.
I registered, but yeah. I need
good food, good conversation.
Sales doctor CTA. We need a reputable babysitter in the LA area. Give my wife some help because these kids. I was telling Billy, I was like, I was going to tell you actually. I feel bad because it's 3 times he's invited me to something, golf, this event. There was something else. I think all 3 times I had to say no just because my kids are just such a handful and I don't want to leave my wife holding the bag and. Now we're trying to put them in events. We're like the kid that's really smart that goes into high school and takes all honors classes and then also wants to play sports. And then after the first quarter, you're like, wow, this is really hard. like the same thing. We're let's try to run a very clean and effective household, but let's also do all these activities with our kids. And then we're like, wow, this is really hard. And then we're maybe we need to backtrack that. So I promised Billy at some point, outside of the podcast, we will find more ways to connect and I need a babysitter. So if anyone in the LA area, anyway, and I agree with you on that. The AI stuff is really tricky. You have to be careful what you put in there because you don't own it. and you're giving information to the model to train it. It's not just pulling from the internet, it's pulling from the data inside the model itself. So really like everything he said. I would just say top performer is going to be tough. I also think you need to put sales or you need to put customer success in there at some point in the onboarding plan, but that's a more nuanced thing.
I do think, though, something that he kind of says without saying it, when we think about like what's a great character trait for a top performer in any role, whether it's a salesperson, whether it's a sales trainer, whether it's somebody that we're going to ask to mentor, when you talk about getting a strong B player in there as a mentor or as a buddy for a new hire, B players have a chip on their shoulder too. You're considered a B player when you don't hit or exceed quota every single month, which means even when you're mentoring somebody else, you're trying to sharpen your own sword as you go through. So I really think there is something to that where when you think about a buddy system, find the people that hit quota 6 months a year, or if you're on a quarterly, find the people who hit it half the year, or if you're on an annual, find the people who would get a B with their quota attainment.
Or the people that might not be top performers, but you're okay with that because you see management potential in them.
Totally. Yeah.
Because like Simon Sinek says, usually top performers are toxic team members and terrible leaders, So it's like something you got to be cognizant of. But it's like, what about that person that's kind of middle of the road or hits quota from time to time 100% or more, but I see management potential in them. Let's see how they knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
Let's see how that goes. Then you kind of, okay. Like that was what Dan did at 3PL Central. When I was in AE, he started having me buddy up with people after my first couple months. And then when once they had their first frontline management position open, he's like, hey, I think you should apply for this role. I'm like, well, you're the direct hiring manager. So are you going to hire me? He's like, well, we always have to interview a couple external candidates. But yeah, it was like, he saw something. He put me in as the buddy person for new people that they hired, went through 3 or 4 different people that got hired, did that, showed him how the knowledge transfer went. And he went, okay, I get that, So I think that, yeah, that's very important. Like, who are those B players that maybe have a chip on their shoulder? Someone that we also think might have management capabilities. Because there are a lot of people also who don't hit quota that are probably pretty good at training and coaching, because sometimes hitting quota is also, it also has a lot of exterior factors that aren't just skill related. We were talking earlier about a seller you and I know who it's like, okay, cool, you got a contract signed, but like you're selling a deal that is, 1/5 of the ACV of like people like me.
Right.
But obviously much, our sale has a little bit more power behind that close because the ACV is much higher. Right. And I think that's part of the problem with LinkedIn right now is it's like every game is different. I could go out to a company that sells restaurant POS software, sling 40 deals a month, but that could be as much in total contract value as 3 deals from someone who's selling MuleSoft at Salesforce.
Right.
They're like, dude, okay, cool. Cool story, bro.
You're probably wondering how we can both work full time, produce a podcast from the Inglewood studios, and still find time to enjoy our lives.
It's because we partnered with Content Quarterbacks to help produce our weekly podcast.
Content Quarterbacks is a full service digital media production company. They will help you ideate, create, produce, and publish your B2B podcast.
Not only do they provide us great content to share with the SalesRx community, they also help us publish our podcast on multiple platforms. They review and track our audience analytics and episode performance, all while providing strategy sessions to ensure that we're bringing the highest quality edutainment to you, our listener.
If you're in the B2B space and want to have a great show like this, you can click the link in the description below and book a free consultation with Content Quarterbacks.
So stop thinking about creating content and start doing it. Now let's get back to the show.
All right, let's jump into our next section. This is Billy's Black Book. This is the part of the show that's become a really favorite part of the show for most of the listeners because it's where a lot of our dialogue and conversation comes in. Billy essentially documents professional happenings and things in his career that he's seeing that surround the core topic that we're talking about today. And he gives us a synopsis. I ask a couple questions. We have some back and forth and some dialogue, and it's a pretty darn good time. So let's get the ball rolling. What are we talking about today, Billy?
Well, we're talking about onboarding. And when we were thinking about what we wanted to cover in today's topic, I got really excited about this one because, for the last 5 years, almost on a daily basis, sales onboarding has either been my direct responsibility or it's been something that I talk about pretty frequently. And that goes back to when I managed an onboarding program. It goes back to when I was a head of sales at a small company, bringing in new sellers. And even now, it's part of my day to day. And, many, 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 many salespeople have been part of an onboarding cohort. The old school way, when you think about it, is like we would all be in a room. There would be a trainer with a whiteboard and you'd be sitting around with your peers. Nowadays, it's like Zoom calls and PowerPoint presentations and homework assignments, either in your conversational intelligence tool or in your LMS.
I miss the old days. I do. I miss getting in a room, using a flip chart, walking through things in person. Oh,
I miss the days of like the big notepad. You remember that one that you were like write with expo markers on? Oh, is that called a flip chart?
Yeah, the flip charts. Yeah.
So, onboarding though is a critical investment that companies make in the people that they hire. And I think about it like this, like you're new in the door at a company. You are rarely for the rest of the time at that company going to be hungrier to take in information, because when you're there, that company is perfect and it can be whatever you want it to be in your own mind. And as a seller, like maybe you joined that company because you got a better comp plan at this company. Maybe they have a competitive edge that makes them the leader of their market. Maybe for you, you got pipped or reduced at a company in the last 18 months.
Well, the responsibilities are different. I don't have the full cycle sell anymore. This company actually has SDRs.
Either way, when you join a new company and when you go into onboarding, like that is the representation of a clean slate for you. And whatever your circumstances may be, it's a new chapter and it's exciting. And it's a good time for you to be able to pay attention and quickly spin up a perspective so that you can be ready for prime time really quick. And a lot of companies, are trying to get their employees ramped up a lot faster. And it puts a heightened observation on the onboarding program, because the leading metric of onboarding and how enablement is measured on it is time to productivity. Maybe it's time to first deal. Maybe it's time to consistently hitting quota. But whatever it is, they're thinking about it as if we onboard well, people are going to be successful. And in my experience, like when I was running the onboarding program, I certainly did not start out onboarding well. And I look back to a story of a guy named Ryan Ferguson. And if you know Ryan Ferguson, he's one of the greatest salespeople ever. He's a ball of energy. He's just one of the best humans I know. And he came into my enablement program the first time I ran it. 10-day program, a lot of one-on-one time. And our average time to first deal at that company was 29 days from day one until close. So if you reduce the weekends, that's what, like 20 days? It's pretty fast in reality. And he took a goose egg his entire first month. And I can tell you that is not indicative of the seller that went through that program. That was wholly indicative of the program itself and where it may have missed. And when you miss in your onboarding program for your new sellers, the company pays for it, the salespeople pay for it, your customer pays for it. So, as we talk about onboarding, I think we need to start by just talking about like, what is the point of onboarding a new salesperson?
Yeah, why can't they just hit the ground running, right? Especially if we're hiring someone who already has sales experience. Why can't I just throw them product documentation and have them sit for a day on how we log notes into Salesforce and talk about things? Why can't we do that? Because that's every company I ever worked at that wasn't a software company prior to my software sales experience. That's how it was. It was like maybe a week, but most of it was like HR stuff one day.
Yeah, it was always one day for me. It was like setting up my direct deposit.
Is. Setting up
Here's-
your direct
Here's
deposit.
a tour of our office that's 2,000 square feet.
Here's where the key to the bathroom is.
Right.
And then day 2, it's kind of like, all right, so you're going to sit and listen to this person call for a little bit. Here's a product book. You go sit in it. Like literally, I remember one job, I was like a reseller of Rico accounts payable document scanning software. Here's a video. Literally, it felt like a cassette tape. Like on my second day after the whole HR intro, people, boss takes you to lunch day, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was like literally, I sat at my desk on a computer and watched like 4 hours of product videos from Rico, the printer company.
Sweet.
And then it was like, okay, here's like our sales scripts and this and that. And then tomorrow you're going to listen to Mikey make calls. And I'm like, okay. And then like by day 4, it was like, go make some cold calls. And I was like, okay, like, yeah. So
And say what?
yeah. So like, I really think that I say all this because people listening who have been in this for a while might forget how good we kind of have it when we do work in the SaaS world comparatively to like going and working at any like local SMB mid-market business that has a sales function. A lot of companies don't typically have an onboarding program. I mean, yeah, a lot of
Right.
SaaS companies do. Now, how can we make it better? But also there's probably a lot of listeners from other industries that we have. You know, we're not just a SaaS podcast. So for those of you that do work in SaaS, like recognize there are some companies where their onboarding is, you know, day 1, fill out your direct deposit. Day
Right.
2, watch product videos. Day 3, go make cold calls. Direct deposit.
Seriously, that's what it was.
Those are those funny little memories where it's just like you look back and you're like, holy crap, how good do we have it working in software where we actually get enablement, you know?
Right. Specialists that do it for us.
Mm-hmm. So when you're going through this process about, you know, learning about onboarding programs, what are the things that you say would take a good onboarding program and make it great?
It's like when I think about an onboarding program, like you need to start with establishing a starting point and an end point. And if that end point is about making somebody minimally good enough to go start doing their job, you need to think about things like what is the time frame to onboard somebody. And when I was going through it, like I thought about it as, okay, how do we even think about how long we keep somebody in a classroom before they actually get to their desk to start doing their job? And a couple things I think about is like how big your seller's quota is or how long your sales cycle is going to be should dictate about how much time you spend, because it is a really important upfront investment. And when you think about it from that standpoint, you need to think about seller payback. When I was managing an onboarding team, we could break even on a new seller's full OTE as a business in about 120 days. And obviously that was during what felt like a blank check era in technology where everybody was buying all the time. Growth was incredibly healthy. We had a very short sales cycle to begin with. And that's very different from a company that might have a 9-month or a 1-year sales cycle. An employee could be there for a very long time before they even get a commission check.
Yeah.
But the components of it, and it's all about salary payback. And when you think about the bricks that go into it, I think about the case of Ryan Ferguson that we talked about. Like Ryan Ferguson, who's a big fan of the podcast, and we love you for it, Ryan. He is a phenomenal salesperson. He's a great AE manager now, but we didn't set him up for success to go out and sell right away. For a lot of other people, they could make it work within the program the way we had it set up, but it didn't help everybody. And so when we thought about it, the first thing that we went back to the drawing board on was like, what is the point of onboarding a new seller? And in reality, it comes down to one thing. Like you need to teach somebody to be successful at their job. And for us, we were so pitch heavy. It was all about, here's how you pitch our software. Here's how you run a demo. And once I teach you how to run a demo, your sales manager will teach you how to do everything else. That was the wrong way to think about it, because in the world of technology, I think something we all have to recognize, especially in the SaaS world, is there are horizontal applications that any business could theoretically use. And then there's vertical. which means there's a specific industry fit for what we have. There's a workflow built within the software that triggers success for a very small cut of the pie. Everybody needs to be a quote unquote expert, right? But nobody's an expert when they start with a company for the most part, even if you've used that tool before. And platforms, especially big ones, as they evolve, they get more complex. You can't teach everybody every complexity and nuance of a platform in a week or 2 weeks or a month or however long you have with them.
Yeah.
So there were a few things that I put into my program that made it successful. Number one, we had to educate everybody on who is our customer. Like, people call that buyer personas, right? But really, who is that customer? What do they do? What is their pedigree? What was their education? How did they get to where they're at? What's their preferred beer when they go to the bar? We wanted everybody to visualize that really well. And I use that bar example because the way we looked at our onboarding program was after 2 days, especially like if you're at a company where you travel in for on-site onboarding, if you're a remote employee, if you're in your hotel bar and you met an ideal customer at the bar, could you hold serve in a conversation with that individual without trying to pitch software? Could you just talk to them about their job and what they do in their company and how they got there? Then you expand on it and you start to talk about like, what are the problems these people have? What solutions exist for the problems they have? Who are the people that are helping solve it? So now you're starting to build out that conversation from basic conversations about the individual to now their business. What are the shortcomings that they may have? What are the things that any business does really well with? Now you can start to introduce competition a little bit and start to diversify yourself versus who you sell against. And then you round out with how to pitch your product. And when you round out with how to pitch your product, you spent a week or however long focusing on the fundamentals of the industry. Now you start to dig in on why you're different. Lastly, the ancillary thing was like, we also had to teach somebody how to be good at their job. And some of that just comes down to educating them on what their day may look like. So we spent time in our onboarding program just saying like, here's how you structure a calendar. If you're, a segmented seller and you're only an account executive, here's when your team huddles are. Here's when you have time to sell. Make sure your calendar is repeatable so that you make time to not only sell, but also do other things to get good at your job. Those were a lot of those bricks that we laid in our onboarding program that started to make it successful. And once we were aware of it, once we started building around it, a lot of things started changing in terms of how fast we could ramp people.
I never understood that one around companies that give people time in their day for professional development. It's just weird to me, man. Yeah,
it's one of the first throwaways in reality that every seller.
Yeah, it is. It's just free time to them. And even to the people that are heavily committed. And that was the thing. It's always been weird to me because for me, it's like, hey, I'm getting hired to do my job. Do I want to get better? Yeah, well, the company's going to do stuff to get me better, like product trainings, team training, stuff like that we do. One-on-one coaching, group coaching, all the stuff we'll talk about in the next episode. But for me, if I want to get even better, listen to a podcast, two guys in Inglewood Studios talking about what a good onboarding plan looks like. I'm going to go do that when I'm at the gym, right? I'm going to go do that while I'm making lunch or while I'm meal prepping on Sunday. Like, this is stuff I'm going to do extra outside of that. This is Peyton Manning taking time outside of practice when he's at home after his kids have gone to bed to watch an hour and a half of game footage instead of go sit and watch, Squid Game, The Challenge on Netflix. No hate. Show is fucking terrible.
I was going to say, if you haven't watched Squid Game, you should, because Chet is wrong and it is great.
The Challenge reality show was terrible. Yeah. I'm talking about the reality show. But anyway,
the reality show was great.
The ink packs. They had people.
All right, some of it was corny, and maybe they didn't treat the contestants well or even pay the winner. But
yeah,
it was 10 good hours for us watching it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're gonna have to take that one offline. We have some really different.
We'll set a one-on-one for it.
Yeah, we'll set a one-on-one. But yeah, I've never understood the creation of actual development time. Go read a book or do this or do that. Hey, how about when you're in the shower, you get a $10 Bluetooth speaker, you throw on an Audible book. So while you're getting ready for your day, the whole time you're in the bathroom, you're spending 45 minutes to an hour, Yes, sometimes it takes me 45 minutes to get ready as a dude. 45 minutes in the bathroom doing your business, and you're listening to an audiobook. Well, most audiobooks for self-help are 5.5 to 7 hours. Guess what? You finish that sucker in 2 to 3 weeks. So easy solve, right? There's your professional development time, because like you said, it typically does become a throwaway in their schedule.
Yeah.
But I like how you created that kind of schedule of how do you maintain and grow from here. So, right, one thing that sets this podcast apart is we like to talk about the what, but you're incredibly awesome at digging into the how. So you get really tactical, and you've kind of clarified, hey, there's this bad onboarding program. We didn't feel good about it. Here's how we took it from, not so good to great. We analyzed these gaps. So other than just doing it, right? Because I think that's a very easy thing to say, like, how did you implement that new plan? Like, what were the execution steps moving forward once you identified these gaps and these things that you needed to do differently?
Yeah, I think to start out, the goal of it was to get people selling faster.
Mm-hmm.
And when I took over the program, we were doing about 29 days. And if you think about that, it's like, that's a lost month for the company. So, we talk about method acting in LA a lot. So first thing was like, my energy needs to be really high, not just so that people have a reason to come in and think that it's entertainment. It is not entertainment. Bringing high energy into every training and like making sure that intensity showed meant that if this is the people that are training me, this is the expectation on the energy I'm going to bring to a customer. If I bring good energy to a customer, and if I even talk faster, then hopefully that accelerates the way people think, and that'll manifest in people getting to that first deal a lot faster.
Dude, that's so right, because I remember going through trainings before, and it's like the first two, it was like, holy cow, I was like, oh, I got to do so good at this job. I got to try. And then I'd have like that training after lunch from someone who was just there to do a training. And it was like, oh,
Yeah.
I could totally feel what you're saying. I'm thinking about one company specifically, but I totally know what you're saying.
But I was always incredibly caffeinated, and like I kind of walk on my toes. I was bouncing around, writing stuff on whiteboard walls. Like it mattered. I wanted them seeing that kind of energy. And the other thing was I needed it informative. So taking that step back to really drill down on buyer personas, if you walked out of those first 2 days and you knew that buyer persona better than somebody who'd been there for 5 years and was trained a certain way and got into one line of thinking, you were impactful. And even just implementing that into it, because we always had the pitch practice and we always had about the competition, but now getting in on being informative of who buys this and why do they buy it. That first year, we cut our time to first deal in half. And so from 2019 and on, like it was a totally different era for that onboarding program. The other thing for a trainer or a sales enablement persona who's ever training people, be self-aware. A very real trend that's happened in sales enablement in the last 18 months, 2 years with the reductions in force we're seeing is a lot of people end up in new jobs. When you're at a new company and like you're not fully aware of who it is that buys this or why they buy it, you have to be thinking about those sellers in seat, which means if you don't know the answer to something, you have to calmly and confidently let your sales team know that you're not the authority for it, but you need to work doubly hard to be able to build a bridge and make sure you have relationships with the people they can go to get the answers for it so that they are learning constantly through your onboarding program. Another thing, this was a big one for me, and this is a big one, I think, for any sales trainer. You have to thoughtfully balance instructor-led training with take-home work assignments or autonomous working time. In 2020, during the pandemic, we had a system called Lessonly, which is now Seismic Learn, which happens to be the company I work at, which is not a plug for it unless you want it to be.
Wouldn't care if it was. Totally plug that shit.
But with it, we now had this LMS program, and we had what was a working enablement program that had a lot of momentum behind it. But there were certain things that sales reps didn't need me to take an hour of their time to explain how to read a balance sheet or what a cash flow statement was. Using systems, and this isn't just LMSs, it's conversational intelligence tools, it's YouTube videos, it's content repositories, whatever it is. If you teach people to take things home and become self-sufficient early, they're going to be a lot more self-sufficient, and they're not going to rely on managers or the sales enablement team to help them learn how to find information to do their job. So I had a whole hub built out that was just the first 10 days, and it was everything. It was curated. As soon as you're done with me in a session, rather than spending 30 hours a week with me, spend 12. Sales trainers and enablers, they have a full-time job anyway that they do beyond new hire training. So let me remove myself from the equation, make you self-sufficient. And when we did that, we accelerated time to first deal 400%. Of all the things that I've gotten right, and there's been a lot of things I haven't gotten right in my career, and there's been a few things that we made a bet and it just paid off. Reducing the ILT, which is the acronym for instructor-led training, burden on a new rep, instead of making them drink from a fire hose, teaching them how to turn the spigot accordingly to find their information. Best bet I was ever part of at a company in terms of just the outright success. And the last thing, pitch training. This is a sports innuendo, so for everybody that is not a sports fan, I'm sorry. I'll try my best to explain myself here.
Ironically, though, when I lead workshops and I make a sports reference, I've also found that like implementing anything you do in sports actually really does actually apply to music as well. So most people have either played in a sport or played an instrument.
Perfect.
So I think,
actually, music would be a great way to think about it.
In that concept too. Anything he's saying, you can really apply it to also music if you've ever played music. So I always think it's funny people feel alienated.
There's
about
actually
the
great parallel there. I said like you need to simulate game day, but you also need to simulate the weight room.
Yeah.
So with pitch practice, one thing we were always doing in our program was like, we're going to teach you how to run a demo. And we had basically a line by line skeleton of like, here's what you need to cover as you go through a demo. But we were also very good at breaking down the different feature sets of the software to teach people how to speak to them. Because you might be an AE who runs your own demos and doesn't have a sales engineer. And that's an expectation anyway. So you need to get really good at speaking to each part of the platform. But also, if you do have an SE, to make sure that you're not tuning out and totally irrelevant to a buyer when you're on it, being able to speak to each different piece of the platform that a sales engineer is going to carry most of the load on, it makes people better, it makes them more confident, and it makes that demo practice a lot easier. And basically, in doing that, we took our total time to first deal from 29 days to 4 in about 2.5 years. So those are some of the things that really worked. And, you know, when you think about bets you take as a business, you hope things hit a certain way. This hit a certain way for our business.
And what is the mindset of the trainer that's kind of leading this process have to be? And I'm sure, you know, we're going to talk about this in the next segment, but there are a lot of hands that kind of go into onboarding.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of different touch points. But if you're the person that's kind of running the onboarding program, what does that mindset have to be while you're helping this person get onboarded?
Your mindset during initial training needs to be the same as it is every single day in that role. And it is that enablement is a very selfishly selfless role. It does not matter how good you feel while you're training somebody. It does not matter how awkward your training may be. What matters is how well is that rep going to grasp what you say? How quickly can they hold serve in an internal conversation or on the call with a customer? Mindset's always got to be about the rep, the fastest, quickest line they can take from you giving them information to them being able to comprehend that information. That's the whole mindset.
And then for a seller, what do you think that mindset should be?
You will never be hungrier to learn at a company than you are when you're in onboarding. It is a brand new world for you. You're not even thinking about quota attainment or the pressures that come with it yet. You are learning for the sake of learning during onboarding. Lean into it and build good muscle memory.
As I lean a little bit closer here to get into the conversation,
I keep watching this picture. I feel like you're about to knock it over.
Yeah, I know. I need to adjust this boom arm sometime in between episodes. I found that it's a little too far, a little too close. And then I guess we called out a couple things earlier. Bad sales hires, and not just bad sales hires, but people who, go through an onboarding program and don't succeed can, lead to 70% of that seller's quota being lost by the company, their salary, as you called, payback periods, all that kind of stuff. Similar to when you buy software, right?
Yeah.
There's a software payback period in terms of ROI. What are some other ramifications of an unsuccessful onboarding program? Like, how does that affect the org on a larger scale than just that individual scale?
Yeah, I think there's 3 answers to that. Number one, like, if you don't onboard well, then you have a lot of uninformed sellers that can't sell, which means you haven't fixed the problem. Number 2, everybody's got to be an expert, but if they're not informed coming right out of the gate when they're so hungry to learn, you have a bunch of experts of nothing. And number 3, it's expensive. It's expensive to hire. It's expensive to onboard. It's expensive to pay salaries. It's expensive to have a supporting, the average cost of an account executive could be anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 to the business every year when you think about salary and benefits and systems and support staff and everything that they need. So if you don't get this one little thing right, that's a massive hit to the balance sheet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Onboarding.
You just made the list.
That Chris Jericho soundbite is the best. Love it, Billy. Thank you for preparing that. And I think there's a lot of takeaways that people can have either as sales enablement managers, sales leaders, even individual contributors. If you're at a place and you don't feel that their onboarding plan is hitting on all those points, definitely an opportunity for you to try to find ways to supplement that. So it's great stuff.
All right, moving on to our third and final segment, Doctor's Orders. This is the part of the show where you, the listener, submit your questions and go-to-market challenges to get a prescriptive, tactical, and practical approach by the doctor himself.
Doctor is in.
All right, Chet, the topic of this one is the sales doctor onboarding plan. So you got a question from a comment on a TikTok video you did about your first 30 days as a rep. And the person is asking, what does a good onboarding plan for a sales rep look like?
Yeah, that's such a loaded question, right? Because
really
it depends
is
on where you work. That's why I love TikTok. It's like they really challenge you to try to speak to them directly when it's, I don't know.
You get one sentence when you need like 6 to get some sort of context deep dive.
Probably going to onboard differently if I work at Seismic than if I work at, XYZ SMB transactional software slingers.com. Well, I want to give a couple real quick in like a minute and a half, high level tips to onboarding before I actually dig into like how I structure out a program typically, which again, we talked earlier, how many sales jobs have we had where we just show up and day 1 it's HR and then day 2 it's this, and by the end of the week
get that direct deposit download.
Get that direct deposit. Go, where's my checking number? Like, you remember how much of a stress that was to like figure out what's my routing number?
You remember when you had to know about a routing number before you knew you could just Google a routing number?
Yeah, or before you could connect everything digitally with, payment processors.
You're dating us right now.
So I think when you look at junior level reps or what you might call SDRs in most orgs, people that are typically newer in their work career as a whole, or their professional experience, or even their sales career, the more, let's say, green a sales role is, maybe they're just cold calling and setting appointments, or maybe they're like a junior seller or something like that. I think there needs to be a buffer week of doing the job without any requirements between that and training in the actual first month of performance, right?
So you're saying like a week 0 almost, like go in, try to hit 20 phone calls and just
just do the thing and let's see how it goes for a week.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about ramping month where month 1 it's 0, month 2 it's 50%. I'm just saying, yeah, that's a great way to put it. Week 0. Okay, your onboarding's technically done. Let's give you a buffer week. And that's usually week 4 for me in those SDR, junior AE onboarding programs. AEs, they should be able to start marrying the two by around week 3. I think that they should be able to hit the ground running. So week 3, you're still doing some enablement and onboarding, but you're also getting a crack at it. And by week 4, you're basically are doing the job to prep for month 1. You're basically getting a head start. So SDRs, junior AEs, it's a week 0. For AEs, it's kind of like a head start that week 4. We'll talk about that, what that week 4 looks like. But the other thing I want to call out, if your training documents are a 2-column slide with a picture and then bullet point text with a title on the other side of the column, you got to rethink your life because 65% of learners are visual. And so if you're building onboarding programs, if you're building sales collateral, you have to find a way to make these materials visually pleasing.
Yes.
And I'm not saying over-engineer it, oversimplify things. No, I'm not saying go one way or the other. I'm saying find a healthy middle ground between whatever a PowerPoint presentation has looked like when we talk about prospecting, when we're onboarding sellers. Maybe even create a handbook. Maybe deliver a printout if you're working remote. No worries. Print things off and send them. Workbook materials, like supplemental things that actually make me feel like I'm going through a program that was designed for me instead of just a generalized thing that you run everybody through in their first 30 days. I've never seen a company that onboards that actually sends accompanying hard documents like a workbook. I haven't seen that yet. You should. Take home assignments, right? Like you said, like asynchronous assignments that you can work on. That's a great way to facilitate
Workbooks
that.
are expensive though, because they get dated quickly at tech companies that are rapidly changing.
But I'm saying, like, you don't order 100 of them at a time. There's a lot of print on demand places, right? That you can pay 10% more to print on demand than buying in bulk. Really, if you don't know a lot about printing, check out John Morris at Club Colors. He runs In the Club Colors podcast, but Club Colors does tons of printing.
And I know nothing about printing.
And yeah, they'll tell you that, you know, not to say that it doesn't make sense to order in bulk. It does. If you're a university and you're printing, 190,000 hats for a thing that's going on. It's a very specific number, right?
Yeah.
190,000.
Thank you for that.
It's I'll tell you why.
What university did you go to? Mine wasn't that big.
I'll tell you why that number is ringing in my head later. But you're gonna print a bunch. But if you're just printing a one-off, it's like a 10-15% discount. It's not a big deal. But accompanying textbooks, even if it's like notes, right? Like a notebook that is company branded. Like there's a lot of stuff that you can do to help supplement that from a visual perspective. But create and design comprehensive training resources. Don't just create them, but design them as well. Make them look great. Every time, shout out to Kevin Hopp. Anytime I've shown him like a thing I'm working on with like a training or a workshop or something, I showed him this workshop I did for Zscaler, and I walked him through the materials and for their SDR leader team. And he goes, you're like, you got something wrong with you, right? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, nobody's brain thinks like this, but yet you put this together this way. It's incredible. And I'm like walking him through these sites and like, you have all these like training points. I'm like, yeah, but that's because I've understood that you have to help people visually learn. And it's not just text on one side, a picture on the other with a title. Like that's not engaging, right? Create flowcharts, create mind maps, create timelines, challenge yourself, use engaging elements. Canvas free for a lot of people. It's very easy to do this stuff. Also use video content to supplement the written word. I can't stress this enough, how annoying it is just to force people to sit on a call with an instructor or just read through something. Like include video to supplement what you're showing. So if you're walking through how to log calls in Salesforce, very simple task. Let's say that's something you're doing. You're doing a whole 2-hour session on how we use Salesforce. That should already be pre-recorded. You can do it live if you want. I think it should be because you can question and answer in the moment. But whoever's leading that should have already done one recorded. And then the sales enablement team should be cutting that up into pieces to put into an LMS or to at least house somewhere in Google So you can look at specific individual tasks and how to do them. And those should be hyperlinked to your training manual.
Do you know it's a great tool for that, by the way? So the problem with video, especially just like in the circumstance you're talking about, is like, if it's anything more than like 20 minutes at a time, video is tough for an enablement team because things change and then you got to go reshoot the whole thing. There's really cool programs like IORAD, where for like Salesforce, for example, instead of me watching an hour-long video about how to take an op through the customer journey, you can actually create a tutorial for it that's just shows like the click path, and you do it 3 times. It takes you 5 minutes to do. Then you hop over into Salesforce and you're capable to just go and do it.
Yeah. And it may not be like their main function, but even products like Toriel, I know they're designed for marketing teams to do product tours, but they're showing the functionality inside of their software. So why could you not build something similar using tools like that inside your Salesforce instance? And your point, I'm not suggesting that you should be referencing an hour-long Salesforce training video. That could be there if somebody wants to sit back and rewatch the whole thing. But when you, just like how we create this podcast and we cut 15 clips from it, right?
Right.
Same thing. We should be cutting 2 to 3 minute clips, little tutorials of tactically how to do certain things. Those videos, wherever they're housed, should be hyperlinked back to a reference manual that people have, a product manual. So video, you need to use more video content. It's not enough just to provide PowerPoint slides and a bunch of product documentation. And then it's really important for reps to get it on the ground floor of execution and understand what good looks like. And so I always say blind scoring is the way to do that. And what I mean by that is you teach them the grading scale that you follow. You have them score whatever it is that you're giving them. And then you kind of see their answers in comparison to yours. Because that gives you an understanding of, well, Billy, why did you rate the opener on this cold call as an 8 out of 10? Because you, as the person who trains people how to cold call and has done cold calling, might have only given it a 5. So you can kind of understand what they think good looks like, and then cover that gap from what you know good looks like, because you are the subject matter expert there. You're the trainer. You're the frontline manager, whatever have you.
For the person who submitted this, by the way, this is actually an interesting strategy to do during onboarding, because sales reps are always going to score themselves higher. You know, like if you have like a scorecard in something like Gong, where there's a 5-point scale for everything, you're going to get a lot of 4s and 5s from the reps that score the calls, because they don't want to put themselves in the doghouse with management. So even teaching them what scoring looks like at the company, that's a good skill.
Yeah. And the calls that they're blind scoring in this onboarding period, they're not their own. They're those pre-recorded calls that you have people listen to during training. But yeah, I like teaching. Yeah. Like, as I said, like teaching them what good looks like from a grading perspective, so they understand the system. And more importantly, they understand why it's the system. Hey, this is why we look at it this way. What do those calls look like? I always say too good, too bad. So you have those housed somewhere. And I don't think we do that enough in training. We show, here's good qualification calls. Here's good cold calls. Here's good discovery calls. But they don't look at like the bad stuff. You know what I mean? They don't look through like, this is an example of a bad call. So too good, too bad. Same with like emails. Here's too good. Here's too bad. And then like if you're AEs, here's deal review. Here's 2 good deals. Here's 2 bad deals. Look at the history of them and what happened and how it changed. So let's dig into the structure real quick. This is how I look at a 4-week process, 4-week onboarding plan. I've always had this thing about the letter P because I think it fits really well. So it's the 6 Ps. Week 1, I think you called a little bit of this out, but that's where we give them the foundation, the people, the problem, and the prospect. People is not the people we're selling to, though. Let me be clear. People is our organization, people mission, vision, values, org chart, department functions, responsibilities, all that sorts of stuff. Problem, I think that's the natural next one you go into, because they need to understand what you are actually solving for, aside from the customer. Like, what is your goal? What are you trying to solve for? Then when we talk about the prospects, that's when we go through that buyer persona training. And when we talk about buyer persona training, part of that is understanding how the problem is spoken to them, their lexicon and vocabulary that they talk about in their industry. What is the industry? and then essentially like the outcome-based benefits that each of those buying personas want. So there is a big difference to me between problem and like talking about like the specific problem for the buyer persona. I think those are two separate things, but you can work people day one, problem day two, and then prospect the next 3 days, or if you do like a half day of the onboarding stuff, you can go through the people stuff and then like cultural stuff. And then you start talking about the problem and the prospect later half the week, but you can get all that done in week 1. Week 2, split 50-50, product and then process. Okay. So you understand us, our org, our mission, vision, values, our culture, the problem we're solving, the people that we sell to, their industry, how they like to be spoken to, golden rule versus platinum rule, treat others how they want to be treated, treat others how we want to be treated, follow the former, not the latter. Product and process is, okay, now here's the product and here's how it works. These are the ins and outs of it. Okay, now you understand the product. All right, now we start talking about your actual performance, your job. Here's the process. Here's the basics of our CRM. Here's our other tech stack that we're using. Here's how it all marries together. Here's now tactically how we go through cold calling, discovery calls. This is our framework for follow-up. This is how we do pricing and negotiation. Here's how a demo works. You know what I mean? You're going through all those things in the process. What is my job going to look like every day? You talked about that schedule. Here's my schedule. Here's the tasks broken out. Here's what they look like. And here's the systems that supplement that. And then I think you get those done in 2 business weeks. That's a lot of information really fast. Weeks 3 and 4 are so critical. Yeah. Practice. Week 3 is practice with help. Week 4, like I said, either week, like you said, week 0 for the junior reps, or it's kind of like the head start for, more tenured reps, AEs, things like that. Week 3 is where that buddy comes into play. You're role playing with people. You're submitting those take home assignments. You're doing those take home assignments. You're starting to sit in on more meetings and be involved, team meetings, coaching meetings. You're being put on the spot. You're an SDR, you're in your weekly group coaching call. We're listening to a call. There's an objection. Guess who the first person to answer it is? The person who just got through 2 weeks of training. That's what you do, right? That's your initiation. This is we're integrating you. You're not going to wait until you start having quota. It's like dress for the job you want or the job you have. You want to dress for the job you want. So we're not going to have you start doing the SDR stuff the first month that you're actually an SDR. We're going to have you do that after 2 weeks of being here. We're going to put you on the spot and get it out of the way. And you know why you don't have any fear of doing that, or your fear might be lessened if you still have a little fear, is because you already listened to 2 bad cold calls because we have you do that in training. And you learn that nobody's perfect and it doesn't matter. And guess what? You know what I always love doing? I always love taking my top SDR and finding their worst call and making that part of a training program that people had to listen to. Because then they saw that the person that's heading to club as an SDR still made probably what is one of the worst cold calls they will ever hear at this company. It also does a great job from the people management perspective because it humbles that person as well. Because even though they're the top rep, they're the person that has the bad call that's in there because it was one of the worst calls we've ever heard.
And you got to be careful with that too, right? Because like, I think it's right on. Like, there's our top performer, highest on the board. And look, they mess up too.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to any VP of sales, they'll still say like, man, occasionally I lay an egg on a cold call.
Yeah.
Well, we can't give that as a training material to a BDR because they still need to aspire to become that person one day. And there's a certain persona you have to play with a VP of sales that you can't be having that in your program. So it's perfect for a top BDR to say like, all right, they messed up too.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great way to, it does those 2 things, right? It keeps that top rep humbled because you're still the person that has the worst call in there. And don't just go searching for your top person's worst call, but
Definitely
it is just
not.
natural that your top people still have bad calls. And if there's one that's particularly bad, use that in your training program. Hey, this is what good looks like. This is what normal looks like. People mess up, this is life. Nobody's perfect.
That comes from leadership, specifically build a good culture where everybody is humble and hungry and the mood is light enough that your top performer is willing to submit that in the name of somebody else getting better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the last thing I'll add for the practice period, when we talk about week 0 or the Head Start week, I think we talked about this at some other point, or maybe this was something we were talking about where we decided to cut it because we were like, this could be another episode. But I am such a firm hater of the term cut your teeth. Do not give new reps a crappy list to work on. Do not give AEs crappy first opportunities to work on. Give them a couple layups. Give your top person the tough ones because they're the great seller, right? Give you have a list of 50 crap leads. Yeah, maybe sprinkle 10 across every single one of your BDRs, but make sure your top one's included. And then make sure that your newest BDR is included when you're putting some good leads together, some prime people to call, because you want those people to have successes early because they get hits of the dopamine and they understand what it feels like to be successful. And it's the Goldilocks theory. Too little resistance, too soon, very much demotivation because things are too easy. Too much resistance too soon, demotivation because of massive amount of failure. You have to have a failure tolerance and meet them in the middle, but you can't just give them a bunch of crap to work and sift through just because they're new and they might mess something up. Guess when it's okay to mess something up? When the thing is already near perfect. And guess what that is? Warm leads. We always think that like, oh, our warm leads need to be taken care of because no, the warm leads are people that are already raising their hand. You literally have to give them the middle finger and like make some sort of awful remark to them to lose that deal. You know what I mean? But if you have inbound SDRs that are fielding qualification calls, great. Go have that person take some inbounds. Don't make them go work a cold list just to get used to reaching out to people. That's what they do in practice. You know what I mean? But when they're in that week 0, let them get some success early. Let them feel that dopamine of doing things right. So they want to keep doing that consistently and they get addicted to that. That's why we scroll on our phones all the time. Do the same thing with them. Give them the dopamine of success so they want to perform it consistently and put in the right behaviors.
There it is.
All right, if I don't get us out of here, Billy's going to eat one of my fingers because I can tell that he hasn't had breakfast and he's hungry. So we got to end this episode, but I've really enjoyed the conversation today. If you're interested in engaging with us or the podcast further, you can check out links to our LinkedIn profiles in the episode description, resources that we have with the Sales Doctor. Don't forget to check out past episodes. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter that breaks down business learnings in less than 3 minutes, www.thesalesdocrx.com. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, enjoyed the show, please leave a 5-star review. If you didn't really enjoy the show, you can leave a 1-star review if you want. We appreciate the feedback. If you're listening on Spotify, you can do the same thing, give the podcast a 5-star rating, but you can also click the follow button so this episode publishes organically to your Spotify feed every week when we release new episodes. Again, big shout out to the sponsor of this week's episode, Kixie. That's our partner in the Power Dialer space. If you haven't checked them out, the Sales Doctor is giving away free 10-day fully loaded trials with hours of call credit so you can try the tool, upload lists, stop listening to dial tones, and start getting connected with your prospects. There's also some texting features in there as well. Their dialer has local presence, so you're not showing up as spam likely. Also, voicemail drop, so you're not leaving voicemails. It's automatically doing that for you. So go get a 10-day trial on us here at the Sales RX podcast. You can click the link in the show description right under the show notes. That's all for us today. We look forward to seeing you every Wednesday. We're going to change the publishing time now. We're no longer 10 a.m. Pacific. We're going to move things up a little bit to 8 a.m. Pacific. So new publishing schedule for those that are interested. And we'll be in time for another installment of the Sales Doctor next week. Stay prescriptive, y'all.